Welcome to this session of Harvard Worldwide Week. I am delighted that in this celebration of Harvard many global engagements, we have the opportunity to discuss what a number of our graduates are doing to mitigate the educational impact of COVID-19 around the world. My name is Fernando Reimers, and I'm the Ford Foundation Professor of the Practice of International Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And it is my pleasure today to introduce a stellar panel, and I'm going to share my screen. Do you all see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fantastic. And so with us today are Vinh, who's a senior director at the Vietnam Institute of Education Sciences, but also a student in the International Education Policy Program at the moment. Vinh is part of the largest global experiment ever conducted by Harvard when we decided to launch a number of our master's degree online. And I'm so delighted that we did that because as a result of that, we can engage students of the caliber of Vinh, who would have probably found it very difficult to disentangle himself from his obligations to participate in our programs. With us is also Drew Edwards, who's a graduate of the International Education Policy Program and the founder of Pangea Education Development, an organization committed to improving the quality of education in the developing world through the promotion and the support of early literacy and early literacy instruction. With us is also Keya Lamba, a graduate of the International Education Policy Program, working as a consultant and who's been very actively involved with an organization that has designed radio education programs to reach very marginalized students in various countries around the world, but especially in Africa, impacted by COVID. With us is also Sajida Shroff, a graduate of the Graduate School of Education, the president of the Harvard Alumni Association Club in the United Arab Emirates or in the Middle East, and the founder of an education consulting company, the Altamont Group. And with us is also Tapia, a graduate of the International Education Policy Program and the founder and CEO of Genera Consulting Group, an education organization that provides advice to education leaders in Mexico to facilitate the development of policies using evidence. So thank you, welcome very much to all of you. And let me put our remarks in context. On March 11 of this year, the Secretary General of the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. That changed life, not necessarily for the better, for most people around the planet. It isn't just the health impact that this pandemic has caused, but there are many ripple effects through which this pandemic has impacted lives and will continue to impact lives, opening a huge hole in the opportunities for many people, in the opportunities of children, opportunities present and future, and perhaps even in our hopes to make a better world. One of the mechanisms through which COVID had that impact was the disruption that it caused in educational institutions around the world. The suspension of regular classes made it very difficult for students to engage with systematic structural learning in the way in which they were accustomed to. And it is likely that this educational interruption and the continued interruption in the immediate aftermath is going to cause the greatest loss in educational opportunity, particularly for the children of the poor around the world in our lifetimes. There are three mechanisms through which this pandemic has had that effect. One of them, obviously, is that teachers and students are not accustomed to interact with each other and with content in the absence of the opportunity to meet physically. The second mechanism is that the economic impact of this pandemic and the health impact has influenced the families of learners and the conditions of life for many learners, so that the support that they were receiving from their families is for many of them lower than it was before. And the third mechanism is that the financial burden caused by the pandemic on states has diminished the fiscal capacity of governments to support education. Of those three mechanisms, the last II are likely to continue even after we find a vaccine and a treatment for this pandemic. So we are on the brink of a crucible moment for the history of education, a history that experienced a remarkable expansion, transformation 70 years ago when the right of education was adopted as one of the rights in the Universal Declaration, unleashing what I have called elsewhere the most important silent revolution in the history of humanity. But this is development in reverse. This is progress in reverse. And so when I decided to invite our speakers today and others to collaborate with me in taking stock of the current moment, in examining what is happening, what impact is this pandemic having in educational opportunity from your vantage point, what do you think is the likely future impact? And how is this pandemic influencing your own leadership, your own ability to sustain educational opportunity? My goal was to invite us all, those who participated in writing this book and those who I hope will read this book, onto a conversation about elevating the awareness about the importance of this moment. Obviously, the health implications of the pandemic are a lot more visible than the educational implications because we see the people who get sick, we see the people who go to hospitals, we see the people who die. But the educational implications are no less important. We're talking about nothing less than the intellectual death of many children, the death of their possible futures. For the girl who decides that she cannot come back to school because circumstances interrupt her education, her life will never be the same of what it could have been because of the pandemic. And that impact is no different necessarily than the health impact that this pandemic is having. So the goal with this conversation today, with this panel today, is invite our panelists to share thoughts about, number one, how has this pandemic influenced the work they do? And what are their ideas about the impact this is going to have? And secondly, what did they learn from reading the 45 essays that are contained in this book examining the impact of the pandemic? One colleague asked me, someone who works in our communications office, I said, why did you invite these graduates to write this book? And the answer was very simple, because they are working every day to sustain educational opportunity around the world. And they are the better informed people to tell us, to analyze what is this educational crisis that we are experiencing and we're on the brink of. And furthermore, they are the ones who are demonstrating extraordinary leadership to try to mitigate, to try to avert the worst of this crisis. So that is, in a nutshell, the motivation for our conversation. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask each of our speakers to answer a question, and we're going to do 2 rounds of those. And then we want to engage with those of you who are with us today. So let me begin with the first question. What impact has this pandemic had in your own ability to do your work? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, how this pandemic has impacted that work, your leadership. And let me begin with you, Vinh.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, thank you, Professor Reimers, for giving me a chance to contribute a chapter in the book and to be on the panelist today. It is a very nice experience for me to actually writing a reflection about, what has been changed to my routine, routine work during such a special period. It is a very important for me. When I look back at that, Vietnam, we control the pandemic quite well, and we come back to the normal now. So looking back at, the last few months, it is a very good lesson for us. So a brief introduction about myself. Professor Reimers has mentioned that I'm a current student at the IEP programs. Before that, I graduated from Harvard 10 years ago, not in education, but with a PhD in math. Came back to Vietnam, work in education in many different positions. I was the principal of the high school, was the dean of the teacher education faculty, a director of the research center. And 3 years ago, I moved to the Vietnam Institute of Educational Science. It is the institute belongs to the Ministry of Education and Training. And you can guess now, I am a policy advisor for the ministries. So based on my experience in the writing, I look at what I have done during the COVID from the different perspective, 3 different perspectives, from a point of view of an academic lecturer, a perspective of an institute leader, and a perspective from the policy advisors. But in the panel, because of the time limit, I want to focus more on, the perspective of the institute leader and the policy advisors. So like many other educational bodies in Vietnam, the pandemic outbreak making more than 300 researchers working from home at my institution. So we have the full year plan with the seminar, the training workshop, the course. Many research projects have been planned for the year 2020, and all of those has been end up being delayed or canceled as a result of the social distancing. And in order for the research activities and other duties of the Institute to continue through the crisis, we have to change our way of working. We need to have a new solution, more innovative way to approach the problem, organize the task, and mobilize the research. For the research institution, it's different from the university. All of the research activity needs to be done, and it is not like, okay, it is a semester by semester, we have to follow that. It is not that time, but we need to ensure everything should go smooth during that difficult time. So we have been involved in many important tasks with the Ministry of Education and Training during that period. For example, simplify the curriculum, modify the school year plan. All the school in Vietnam has been closed down for 3 months. So we have to cut down 3 months of the school year, simplify the curriculum to match with the new school year, supporting for the policy and the regulation drafting. However, the most important challenge that I look at the policy levels, beside of the solving the problems as a lecturer or dealing with the consequence, is the ability to envision for the future and anticipate and prepare for the time to come. And I think it is the more, the more important mission for the institution like us. We need to investigate on the scope of the pandemic after effect and set out a preparation and the action plan that connect of the relevant stakeholder. What happened after the pandemic go away, or what is the next wave of the pandemic, for example, in Vietnam. And we need to connect all of the stakeholders in the education system, including the school, the university, educational agency, and so on. So let me give a reflection on one of the big projects that we have done during the social distancing period. So after 3 months of the first official reported case in Vietnam, it is in end of the January, and 2 months after the school closing down, our institution has initiated an investigation and writing up a national report for the Prime Minister on the educational effects of COVID-19 across the country. And in order to do that, we established 3 research groups in the institutes, focusing on 3 levels: the preschool, the general education, and the higher education levels. And the local departments of education and training from 50 provinces and more than 180 universities were requested to provide the data and the input using the guidelines by our institution. So we focus on a few things. The first one is the implemented measures by the local authorities and the educational agency in prevention and ensuring the well-being of the student and the staff. The second thing is the student continuity of learning. And the third thing is the school finance crisis. So implementing such a large-scale projects under a very tight time frame. Actually, we have only less than 2 weeks to finish everything in the social distancing situation, was a significant leadership challenge for us. But what makes the real difference from my observation is the commitment and the determination of everyone involved. And the experience is a very unique situation. So I can see that everyone involved, they move from their regular duty and their responsibility, they move out of that. So they can show that, I need to take care more. I need to go out of my room, and I need to take care more about that. And like the thousands of the teacher and the educator in the country during that difficult times, the researcher in my institute, they also show the highest level of the willingness to work to the final outcome to improve the overall situation. So, all in all, I can see that during that difficult time, people so, I mean, they come closer to each other and they want to contribute more for the general situation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vinh. Let me turn it over to Drew. What are the key messages, Drew, in your chapter? How did this pandemic influence your own leadership, and how have you adjusted?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an unprecedented time for all of us. And I think one of the things that I wrote about is that there is no playbook for this one. I think often it is the case that there's some sort of playbook or blueprint in which we can follow at least the structure of and activities that have happened in the past, but we're really in pretty uncharted territories. And so a lot of what I focused on was just leadership, my own leadership, our organization's leadership, and what that meant for navigating a moment like this. A lot of our work is done in Uganda, and we're doing more in the United States now as well. And we've been actually expanding during this crisis. And so as a result of that, one interesting lens that we've had throughout the time has been, while we're all being affected by this globally at the same time, we're not being affected by it equally. And I think there's a great analogy. We're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boats. So some people are in kayaks, other people are in aircraft carriers. And so, some things that we've been navigating are still that the schools that we serve in Uganda are still out of school. We're looking at an entire lost dead year. And that's a very real reality there. In the United States, you still have hybrid learning models that are remote learning models. Some are in school, but you still have a tremendous number of children who do not have, who have disadvantages and others to advantages. And so one thing that we sat and thought about as an organization, as I think any organization should, is first and foremost, what do we need to do to ensure that everyone's safe? And I know that everyone's thinking about this, but I think it's important to keep reiterating that with the severity and the consequence being fatality possibly. And I think we all need to be responsible for that. We work in education, just like everyone here. And one of the things that we have centered on in all of our programming is putting people at the center of our programs and have face-to-face human interaction at the center of our programs. When this pandemic started, despite having a plan that was ratified by our board and having all the equipment for remote working, we had to pause and change everything. All of our plans went out the window when we understood how severe this pandemic was. And so, we have three main programs. We work in literacy and the cultivation of literacy in the classroom and at home. And in the classroom, we do a lot of teacher training. All of our teacher training is coaching based. That had to be put on pause. There was just simply no way for us to continue that. And I'll talk about how we pivoted with that a little bit, but that had to get paused. The other piece is we have a mobile library service, which is sort of like a Netflix style subscription to books. Then we serve schools, we serve individual homes. We were worried about surface transmission. And if everyone remembers the conversations we were having, the first initial data was saying that this virus could live for days on end on different surfaces. And we didn't want to be culpable for carrying that and transmitting it across communities. And then the third part is that we work in publishing. That's really our largest side. And that was relatively unaffected in terms of the internal workings. But in terms of production, it did have a big impact. And so we sat down, there's Marshall Gans has a great quote on leadership that I thought is compelling. And I have thought before this, and it served as a kind of a guiding star during all of this. And it's that leadership is accepting the responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. As a leader, our big goal was to help find purpose with everyone in our organization to help address this crisis. While we're all concerned about our funding, we're all concerned about our strategic plans and all of these things that we work really hard on to move forward with. What has to stay center in all of this is why we're in this work in the first place. This is the greatest disruption to education in a century in avian history. And so one of the big things that we focused on in hiring is we want people who deeply believe in that mission. And I couldn't be more proud of how our organization responded. Within 16 days, we developed a book that explained about COVID. And we were able to produce that faster than any other publisher in the world, to my knowledge, at least at this point. And so, one of the challenges that we I guess grew from is we tried to find ways to iterate and fail slowly. So there were pieces that we tried. We tried doing teacher training remotely. We tried it via WhatsApp. We tried it via video. It simply wasn't feasible for the teachers that we were working with. When schools went out, that also meant school fees were not being paid, and so teachers weren't being paid, which meant that they could not spend their time on that. We have families that are more worried about eating than they are about anything else. So one of the, I think one of the focuses for us has just been trying to find ways to make small iterations within our own work to try to help continue learning and make sure that learning was still going on. And for us, that learning has simply shifted towards publishing more books, and we've seen more analog books and purchasing happening in our business since it's ever begun. And you know, one of those books, Sajida was a part of. She was one of the heroes that we are, they're heroes, I guess, as we say, that we highlighted. So we've been, you know, so proud to be able to try to spread critical information, but also positive information that wouldn't necessarily have been the core of our programming prior to this, but it's become integrated with our mission to help continue learning around literacy during this time.
Thank you so much, Drew, for that presentation. So the power of keeping people at the center, spotlighting good things that are happening, and continuous iteration. Keya, how about you? How has this pandemic impacted your own leadership, and how have you adjusted?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Professor Reimers, for the opportunity. So I have been consulting with an organization called Rising Academy Network for the past year. And to give you a little bit of context, they are a school network and have schools in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Ghana. And during this COVID-19 crisis have pivoted to radio lessons. I joined them as an early childhood education lead and now have also moved to work on their global partnerships as well. And I think it's important to note that this essay was a reflection both of my own leadership during this time, but also reflections from 3 other IEP alumni who have also consulted with Rising in some capacity or another, Flick, Samaya, and Natasha, as well as reflections from people within the Rising organization in country on the ground who are the ones recording these radio lessons and getting them into the hands of students. So this Rising on Air initiative has been incredible to work on, and I think one of the reasons is that it is a perfect example of the collective leadership in this global education movement that Professor Reimers, you describe as the introduction in this book. And so I thought I would start by giving some of my personal reflections during this time and then talking about the community that we've built, which has been one of the most incredible and unexpected parts of this Rising on Air initiative. So to date, the Rising on Air program is a 20-week program of radio scripts all the way from early childhood education up to senior secondary, along with teacher professional development. And it's currently being used in over 25 countries by 30 partner organizations and 5 government organizations adapted for their local context. And it's reaching about 10 million children at the moment in some way. So one of the first things that we felt when COVID happened is there was this feeling of kind of confusion, and a lot of people were scared all throughout the organization, from teachers, students, and families up to senior leadership. And I think one of the main things I've learned as a leader during this time is that you cannot let perfect be the enemy of good. I was managing a team of writers remotely, most of whom I'd never met before, to write these lessons. And we had to move extremely quickly to get these scripts up and on the national radio. So it was quite impressive that the Ministry of Education in both Sierra Leone and Liberia, as they've been through one pandemic before, Ebola, managed to get education content on the radio within 2 weeks of schools closing, and Rising was providing some of that content. So because we had to move things around so quickly and I was managing this team I'd never met, we had to make decisions, the best decisions that we could with the information that we had at the time. And in the beginning, I was spending a lot of time going over every lesson, making sure every component of it was perfect, and then realized that we just had to do the best we could and move as quickly as we could at the same time and make sure that the lessons were good, but maybe they weren't the perfect ones we wanted to put out. And I think, so that's absolutely an important lesson I learned about being flexible and adapted and trying to give your team as much clarity as you can while moving as quickly as you can to implement your solutions. And then one of the most powerful things that came out of this Rising on Air initiative is the collaboration of leaders and organizations that we have had access to during this time. We started a second initiative called Collaborators on Air, which has 104 individuals as part of it on a Slack workplace where everyone's come together to talk about the distance learning solutions that they're doing, from SMS to WhatsApp to TV to radio. And people have been so generous with their time and resources and connecting and collaborating with each other. And I think that's one of the most important things that's come out of this, is this piece of global collaboration with a lot of people who are working in the same space and trying to figure out different things that work, as you said, Drew, for their context and kind of what's most relevant to their students. So those are some of my initial reflections.
Thank you so much, Keya. Wonderful. Sajida, over to you. As the CEO, the Chief Execution Officer of a global consulting company, I can imagine how this pandemic and the suspension of travel impacted your business. How did it impact your own leadership, and how did you adjust?
Thank you, Fernando, for inviting me to contribute to the book and for inviting me to be here today. It's wonderful to be here and meet everybody. So Altamont Group is, as Fernando said, a boutique education advisory, and we do both investment as well as advisory. Our motto is Education Shift Paradigm. This has been our motto, embodying our long-held belief that in order for education to shift paradigms, the paradigm of education must itself shift. We believe this well before COVID-19 gripped the globe and are now more certain than ever that this is the appropriate way to move forward. As we're all aware, COVID-19 forced a radical shift for leadership, unlike anything ever seen previously in history. I can't remember a time when I have heard the word unprecedented applied quite as much as I've heard since the start of 2020 and the steady spread of COVID-19 globally. Because of the need to limit transmission, the universality of mandates around physical distancing was remarkable and quickly applied in most countries across the globe. Homes have become schools, parents have become teachers, screens have become paper, and airwaves rather than buses bring classes together. This is education unlike ever before, and it is only possible with an openness to leading the shift. As CEO of Altamont, I pushed my team to embrace the unknown in order to adapt and understand these unprecedented challenges our partners and clients are facing so that we can provide innovative and effective solutions. And yet, many of these strategies were not new. Altamont Group met these challenging questions by relying on the project management approach to produce evidence-based recommendations. We used already established best practices. The world's ability to track, gather, and update data has been on display in recent months, but with that comes the risk of having too much data. With so much available, it is easy to lose focus on what you seek to address. Altamont Group has narrowed its focus to relevant information and specific actionable recommendations, all while working closely with all levels of stakeholders to ensure the need in terms of infrastructure, capacity, and sustainability are met. We have realized that yes, the challenges are different. However, these challenges have created opportunities to take advantage of the new ways of working, collaborating from all over the world, exchanging ideas, utilizing skills and teamwork. An unrelenting demand for solutions globally, team building, delegation, and a high level of internal collaboration became even more central to successful leadership during the pandemic. Women are bearing the brunt of additional caregiving at home as a result of this pandemic. As a large number of women are employed by Altamont Group, women represent a key stakeholder, and it was important to me for them to exchange ideas, offer feedback, and have the flexibility they need to thrive personally and professionally. One way to allow this exchange is the opportunity COVID-19 has created by removing the possibility to network in person. It was important for us that we not lose the valuable information and interactions that happen over coffee breaks, chats around the water cooler, and even, waiting for the elevator. So luckily, our worldwide focus has built a foundation of digital tool use amongst our network of consultants, even before the pandemic. We have built upon this foundation during this time with internal commitment to grow these informal connections in new ways. We didn't want to forget our team while we were working on everything else that we've been trying to support externally. So with COVID-19, we've been left with no choice but to be open to replacing traditional practices with innovative strategies, especially considering limited resources and capacity. However, the pandemic did allow us to not only think outside the proverbial box, but to extend our imagination. The reach of our imagination is extended now to all aspects of the education ecosystem, to teachers, parents, and school leaders in partnerships with other contributors to propose solutions, offer support, and provide resources and advocacy. As we think about the future of education post-COVID, Self-reflection and solicitation of feedback will be key to making the necessary adjustments to adequately and effectively serve individuals and families in need. Any gains made in education risk being lost for decades with immeasurable social and economic impact to our youth. We've already talked about this. With the collective memory, however, of what we have learned, we will give educational systems the support they will need to face future shocks. In 2020, the loss of education, traditionally done, has underscored all that it provides beyond learning. Nutrition, socialization, mental health supports, checks on students' well-being, protection against gender-based violence, critical support for special needs children, those with disabilities and their parents, and a crucial childcare resource intricately linked to the economy. As part of Altamont Group, and we work across many countries, over 15 right now, it was personally my mission to ensure that we as an organization, as teams, and as individual consultants, gather our collective ability to pivot and understand the challenges in order to respond quickly. So immediately we pivoted to providing resources and information to higher education institutions, looking to fill gaps in learning as schools and universities scrambled to make learning resources available for all students in the wake of school closures. And to support those with concerns about higher education and career outlooks post-pandemic, we developed a webinar series, for example, for high school seniors and juniors, as well as current university students. To support families and students, we have empowered families with knowledge to make the decision that is right for them and their child, offering interactive sessions that support dialogue and build a sense of community. And by responding to specific challenges that have emerged, we have shifted to a future-focused imagination and commitment to action to alleviate the inequities this pandemic has eliminated and respond in truly, hopefully transformative ways. Thank you.
Sajida, thank you so much. It's very helpful. Daniel, tell us, what did you learn from this pandemic? How did it impact your own leadership? And how have you adjusted? There you go.
Thanks, Fernando, for inviting me to contribute to the development of this book. My name is Daniel Tapia. I'm currently founder and executive director of Genera, a public policy consulting firm specializing in education based in Mexico. I would like to highlight 3 key messages, which I'm sure that will be relevant for our discussion. The first message is at the onset of this crisis, complex educational challenges will arise. And this crisis is exacerbating pre-existing educational disparities and dilemmas. But at the same time, these changes have stimulated innovation and creativity in the education sector. And also, from my personal point of view, is highlighting that education must adapt to these new changes to deliver quality education and to reduce the gap in terms of inequality. Educational leaders must envision a promising future of learning, and in some way, I'm certain that we are leading through that path. I would like to recognize the effort that millions of students, parents, teachers, principals, and decision makers in the education sector are facing currently in Mexico and around the world. For me, that is a genuine proof of leadership facing these challenges with professionalism and commitment. The second message is an emphatic approach expressed by values. Let me understood that well-functioning teams are very important to deal with crisis. During this situation in my firm, I try to leverage my team. During my classes, I try to support my students, and in my professional network, I try to collaborate strongly with other colleagues in these unprecedented times. And one of my mentors told me, all of us is smarter than any of us. So I really believe that collaboration is a very strong asset to deal with this crisis. I also understood that adopting and replicating values such as hope, trust, commitment, and kindness will transcend the way we live during these difficult times and will set the standard for our society. Teams, networking, alliances are very valuable stepping up during this context. And we have numerous examples of collaboration and cooperation that are appearing around the world. People are trying to work together to improve education, to reduce the learning gaps, to enhance access to technology, as Drew, Keya, Vinh, and Sajida underline. But even with the intent of collaborate is present, the incessant stress present during that crisis makes it significantly harder for teams to sustain performance and also institutional objectives. For that reason, I believe that resilient leadership is very important, and education leaders are facing unprecedented times, and I believe that they can only overcome by responding, learning, and adjusting as a team. And effective teamwork matters more than ever, and that's the reason why I think it is very important to improve education and all the matters that are around this issue. And the third message is leadership must be a verb and not a noun. I believe that leadership is about practice. It's defined by what we do. And during this crisis, I found inspiration from every person passionate about education, especially in Mexico. There's an example of two Harvard alumni, Marilena Ortega and Eugenia Garduño, who, among other female talented professionals in Mexico, found an initiative called Women United for Education that integrates the vision of gender equality in education, especially during these times. And I believe these educational cases are relevant assets during this crisis. I believe that we must lead by example, and I think it is the most important contribution, lead and inspire. This is not the time for blame, judge, or divide, as many of our international leaders are doing currently. We need to define a new chapter by collaborating to reinvent education and our future. And finally, I believe that this current situation is forcing me to ask deep questions about how I live and how can I inspire others by my work. And also it's motivating to engage with others and develop new and creative ideas to overcome this crisis. I'm trying to live with a motto that is recover, respond, and reimagine.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for those reflections, and also for spotlighting some of the silver linings that you see happening, some of the goodness amidst this crisis. Well, thank you all very much. Let me now ask you another question. You've talked about how this pandemic impacted you, your organizations, your leadership, how you bounce back. What did you learn from reading the entire book? And I'm not going to quiz you on a particular page, but I think you've looked at least at some of the book. And as you look at the composite, as you look at this collage, what surprised you? What did you think about that perhaps you hadn't considered before? I'm not going to call on anyone, just speak as the spirit moves you. You can just, there are few enough of us that you can just go ahead.
Yeah, I would love to jump in with that. I mean, it's something that I actually found when reading about Rising on Air, and Keya that was involved in leading this, was this idea of trust that was written about. And so trust in collaboration, but also in the development of materials is, I mean, we all have practices and control mechanisms to try to make sure that whatever we're putting together and putting out is quality and meets standards. But I think the unprecedented timeline has demanded that trust. And I think that's not something, you know, I had articulated or had thought about in our own leadership before. And I thought that was compelling for a moment like this.
Perfect, Drew. Excellent way to get us started. Others, go ahead, Sajida.
So to me, there was two things that really jumped out at me. One of the things is something that I had already experienced and I was so amazed at, is this collective approach to sharing, to open sharing. You know, I think in the past people were a little bit hesitant to share, you know, their best practices or something that they felt was proprietary to them. But in this COVID time, unprecedented, you know, people were out there sharing. And I thought that was very powerful. And that was epitomized by many of the examples that we saw in the book in terms of the essays and the experiences. The other thing that I I really loved about the collection of essays was the collective effort that we as humankind, and secondly as educators, have been forced to embrace during COVID-19. And you know, the students and the alumni that were featured as part of this essay collection exhibited bravery and determination, commitment and love to all the students around the globe, who were impacted by the pandemic, and then really showcase innovative ways to push for their universal rights to education, no matter what the challenges and setbacks were. You know, we weren't going to give up. We were going to keep trying. We were going to find a way to make it work. And so, you know, numerous decisions were made, and this was exhibited by all the stories, all the essays in the book about people putting the safety of students first, putting the teachers first, looking at, you know, the financial needs of families and educators. And you know, one of the examples that really stood out for me was the Camino 21 with Mr. Paul Islas. I was so encouraged by the perseverance and commitment and the solidarity that it inspired. And I just thought that the way that they were formulating the work, the care that they had for their stakeholders was very impactful and came through very clearly in the way that Paul presented it, and very inspiring really in terms of the ability to not just think about the education component, but also think about the people component, which is so critical in this time.
Thank you so much, Sajida. It's very good. Other thoughts? Go ahead, Keya.
It was interesting reading through them, actually, how many similar themes I saw across. And I think there were two that kind of stuck out for me. One was on the emotional human side of it. Like, a lot of people talked about the emotional turbulence that they went through. And I think even Drew, I remember one thing you said stuck out to me that was like, I am not my work. I need to take time for myself as well. And Daniel, you also talked about talking about the well-being of your team and how you knew productivity would decrease, but that was okay because right now we need to take care of our emotions and our team and the people. And the second was about kind of the lasting impact of COVID and how this is an opportunity to reimagine what this looks like. And Sajida, you so rightly pointed out that it is highlighted for people how much more schools do than just education in terms of food, shelter, mental health. And then also, Vinh, you spoke about like how on some form of online or distance learning is here to stay, and how can we kind of reimagine what this looks like. And I think especially for early childhood education, which is what I care about, this is a time when parents, teachers, schools are all feeling this pain at the same time, and is a real opportunity to kind of think about what this can look like and reimagine going forward.
Thank you so much, Keya. Go ahead, Daniel.
I found this book as a compelling opportunity in which we can connect with others who are passionate about education. And when I was reading the book and the different stories, I felt empathy by reading about how different colleagues are facing difficulties from their perspectives, realities, and contexts, and the way they are leading to go through this situation. I believe that this book explores the relation between crisis and opportunities. I found it as a valuable tool that articulates situations, experiences, and feelings. As Keya said, it's like the human side of leadership, you know? And reading the book allowed me to analyze that while leadership presents to each of us the opportunity to demonstrate the best of what we are, it also exposes our limitations. And I think it's very normal to feel like that, you know? In this way, what we need is to lead with the heart and with the head. A combination of values-driven leadership and focused leadership through the use of evidence with sharp clarity of what we want to achieve. That is, I think this is something very important, because we have seen various leaderships around the world that are missing these two elements. They are not leading with heart, and they are not leading with evidence. And this is very dangerous. And finally, as Martin Luther King once said, the ultimate measure of a man or a woman is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort, but where he or she stands at times of challenge.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Vinh.
Yeah, I just want to add one comment. I mean, so based on my readings, I can see that how important the teachers are to our education system. So we can have a great confidence on our teacher as well. So during the pandemic, we can see that the teacher, they prove their warriors spirit. They prepare the lesson, the online lesson They make the learning material for the student. Even that, I mean, they never do it before. Many teachers in, I mean, the disadvantaged developing country, they never have, I mean, chance to do the online learning. They try to learn it. Even, I mean, the late career teacher, they still, I mean, do their best for that. And they also provide academic and mental support for their students, even while coping with their own struggle and the hardship. So I think the lesson that I learned from this is no matter under which context, people are still the key driving force for the education. And the pandemic has given us the opportunity to see that together we can do, I mean, whatever we want to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. At this point, let me invite those in the audience who are joining us live to type questions that you have or comments using the Q&A function. At the bottom of the screen, you should see a Q&A. You can just type there and type your question, and I will invite our panelists to scan what you see there, and then we'll do a round of answers. But as we give them time to do that, let me ask you a question. I have a sense that in this moment that we're in, things will, on many fronts, are likely to get worse before they get better, educationally and otherwise, economically, as this pandemic interacts with other pre-existing challenges. And some of you have alluded to that. How, you know, as you read this book, as reflecting your own leadership, what advice do you have for how people keep hope? Because I agree with what you said, that it's really very important to try to be a force for good at this difficult time. But this time is impacting you as well, is impacting us, is impacting those who are listening, is impacting the other writers, it's impacting every leader, every education minister, every person who has responsibility to sustain education. And so knowing that 6 months or 7 months into this crisis, we may not have seen the worst of it yet, and we don't know where the end is. How do you think that yourselves or others should sustain their own hope and their own capacity to lead others in a way that is constructive, that is effective? Go ahead, Sajida.
Okay, so I think that just going back to the book for a second, I also really enjoyed the perspectives of Mr. Estrada again. So, you know, I think what he said was really critical, that COVID shed the light on the existing cracks of education. So education wasn't working right in the first place, okay? And so COVID has given us an opportunity to really think about those challenges and those gaps in a way. I mean, we had to react so quickly, right? But it forced us to really think out of our box, to think about our natural comfort zones when it comes to education. Because, you know, as educators, and I'll say this because I am one, you know, we definitely know how to talk the talk. It's a little harder for us to walk the walk. For us to shift, we like the idea, but agility is not necessarily something that is ingrained in us, because, you know, we're taught to do things a certain way. We then want to continue to share that forward. So just to your question, Fernando, in terms of hope, to me, when I look at COVID and I look at where we are, where we've come from in the last, you know, basically 6 months, and where we're headed in the future, I think COVID, if we choose to look at it this way, has given us many silver linings. To go back also to what Daniel said, you know, it has provided us with the opportunity to educate in a different way that's more inclusive, more resilient, more agile, more innovative, right? So, you know, this collaborative space that we have now created, that's a global collaborative space. We've never had this before. I can't think of the number of discussions I've been having with people in all places in the world, exchanging best practices, learning from each other in a real way, you know, to be able to apply those then within different contexts, and more awareness about the nuances and challenges and risks that people face when learning in this context. So to stay hopeful, I look at the positive. I look at all the wonderful things we've been able to gain, the learnings from each other, the sharing, the innovation and the implementation. I mean, look at Keya and her team have done, what Drew and his team have done, Daniel and Vinh, all of you in your respective geographies, us in our respective geographies and the organizations, we have been able to effect change. So that is to me the hopeful thing, and that people are more open to change. People are more listening to the fact that, it's okay, we can do things differently to make it better for our students, for our educators. That to me is a silver lining, and that's what I cling onto when I have my less than hopeful days.
Thanks, Sajida.
I would piggyback off that. I mean, I think, Sajida was one of the people that participated in our book to spread the idea of hope and recognize the goodness that's happening all around us. And I think you need to look no further than your own. I think that's been central to me. I mean, the Harvard community has been instrumental in a lot of the work that we're doing. The Harvard community, I think, has translated half of our 14 languages that we put the books into, just voluntarily. And so I think the IEP program in itself has stepped up into that. But I think, I don't know if everyone else has felt this as well, but I've never had more of an outpouring of support to try to help learning and ensure that learning's happening. And so it's been more so a balancing act of managing all of this will and desire to try to make an impact and to try to collaborate with all these organizations that want to collaborate with than anything. And so I think if we just look around us and take a moment to recognize all the hope that's around us, I think we can see it within ourselves. And even, a brief quote from Jericho Brown, who won the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry this year, is that only the creative mind can make use of hope. And so one of the things he talks about quite a bit is, I think this idea that hope isn't as comfortable as certainty, but it's also a bit more certain than longing. We're kind of left in this liminal space that we all have to learn to navigate. And if we do that together, it's a bit more clear.
Drew, and if you have it handy, maybe you can share your screen and show us a cover of that book, which I think is important for two reasons. One, because we know that this pandemic is increasing violence against women, and it is affecting disproportionately girls in some places. That if there are people at risk of being impacted educationally by this pandemic, it's girls and young women. And so looking at this crisis and its impact with a gender equity dimension is very important. But the second thing that the book does is it highlights the leadership of women in this crisis. Of women that are extraordinary, but also of ordinary women that do extraordinary things, reminding all of us of our own potential to make a difference. So I think the choice of focus for this book is so for the moment. So if you have that cover, you may or may not have it. Maybe you can, there you go. Sheroes of COVID, a book about women leading in the COVID-19 crisis. And I have read the book. I've endorsed the book. So there you have it. And you also made this book freely available, right? As an online book.
Yeah, it's freely available online. Right now, there's only 5 languages for this one, and we're working on another 9 more. But you can find it on our website, and I'll put that in the Q&A as well. But we want it to be, available for parents to help talk about the things and help kids see the things that are positive that are going on around them, but also that are going on around the world. Because as you mentioned, Fernando, and I think a few other members, women are leading us in this crisis. Women are 70% of frontline and essential workers. Women are the people at home that are bearing the burden quite often of continuing learning, in addition to all the other responsibilities that move our communities forward in this time. And so, we wanted to highlight that it's, again, freely available for classrooms and for families anywhere online.
Thank you very much, Drew. Other thoughts on sustaining hope, your own and of other leaders, other than reading Drew's book? Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Fernando, I believe that preventing the learning crisis from becoming a generational catastrophe needs to be a top priority for world leaders and the entire education community. And I think hope is a very relevant element, a very relevant value that we need to replicate. The multitude of actors needed to respond to and mitigate the impact of crisis can lead to duplication and inefficiency and confusion in the absence of a strong leadership and leadership with hope. For that reason, I have 4 recommendations. The first one is we need to be more emphatic. I believe that in so many countries, in so many places, we are dealing with some situations that are very difficult to respond to get an answer. But I think that we need to be more emphatic that we are a privileged community and that we need to work together to enhance the future of others. The second one is, I believe that we have to become more active citizens, and in all the ways. We need to understand that we have some obligations, but also we have some responsibilities of citizens. Not only citizens at the local level, but citizens at the international level, because what matters at the local level will have an impact, and a positive impact in the international level. And the third one is look for inspiration. I wrote it in the chapter, and for me was very productive, was very effective to look for inspiration with you, for example, for you, with you guys. I mean, what you are doing in Africa, what you're doing in the US, what you're doing in your countries, for me is like a very positive inspiration to move forward and to get the things done. And the fourth one and the final one is collaborate. I think that you will be able to win some battles alone, but you will never win a war without the collaboration with others. I mean, I hope you can understand that I'm not saying that we are going to go to the war. I mean, you know, but I think hope is contagious. And in some way, if you collaborate with others, you can also motivate and enhance their possibilities to promote change in the realities of the different contexts of the country.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
I was thinking of two levels of things that kind of are bringing me hope on a daily and then longer term basis. One on a daily basis is just seeing stories of teachers and students who are still trying to maintain this connection while school is shut. And on days when I'm having, you know, a really difficult time, or recent reports that come out talking about the decades of learning that have been lost, I find little inspiration in seeing these everyday moments of teachers and students really connecting and going above and beyond. And then I think on a systems level, one, of course, all of the work that the IEP alumni and lots of people are doing is really inspiring. But two, I think it's the first time, as many of you have echoed, where education is a topic of conversation for everyone in every household on a daily basis in a way that it's never been before. And I think that gives me a lot of hope that this could be time to really get education on the forefront of everyone's agendas and make some long-lasting change.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
I think thank you. The other thing that's really come to a fore is exactly that, which is that parents are now understanding the critical value of education and teachers in schools. I think that's something that, you know, perhaps was taken for granted in more recent times. And so now parents are realizing how difficult it is for educators to really do what we need to do for children and young people. And so there's more value inherently now placed in education, which to me, again, is a positive for the future, because if people are seeing the inherent value of education, that means that they'll understand the need to dedicate more time and resources to education, you know, which is something that we've all been striving for and fighting for in our own way throughout the years. So to me, that's something else that gives me hope, is that people are finally seeing how important it is about what we do, and therefore they're going to know that when we're saying something, we're saying it with gravitas, with, you know, with validation, with justification, and it's for the benefit of their children, and not just their children, but truly society as a whole. So to me, you know, I don't think that would have ever come to light if we hadn't had, God forbid, this kind of situation where parents had to take a little bit more interest in terms of their children's daily learning, and all of a sudden they realize how hard it is. So that's another thing that gives me hope on a more sort of holistic macro level.
Maybe there is hope that, in fact, there will be a renaissance at the end of this pandemic, right? The Secretary General of the UN, who has really placed this crisis in its proper dimension, saying this is not just a health crisis, it's a human rights crisis, an economic crisis, an education, a health crisis, that is going to call for a whole of society, whole of the world response, right? Driven by solidarity and so on. He has urged to try to make this crisis a moment to build back better, to basically, as the society has shown in its most raw form, the vulnerabilities of societies, the inequalities, as let's build back better. So let me ask you, do you see it? I mean, it sounds good, but do you see it? Do you see a path to build back better? Do you see a path for you to helping to build back better? What does that look like from where you stand?
Fernando, I think that when we face this kind of crisis, there are a lot of opportunities that we can identify and that we start to execute actions to improve that negative situation. What I believe is that leaders will need to stay committed to the principles of empathy, hope, and well-being of the students. We need to understand, as you have pointed out, that this is a truly important a moment of our lives, because we have the responsibility in some ways to save the generation of students, an entire generation of students that will not have the opportunity to get access to education, that they will not have access to technology to get their remote and virtual sessions. And I think that we have the responsibility to stand up for these students. And I really do visualize a very clear path where education, teachers, and the entire education community will be very relevant. I mean, technology, in my personal point of view, is not the end. It's a mean. And we need to understand that technology will not replace teachers, will not replace the power of families, the values that they share in their houses and in community. I mean, those things are very important. We need to think that the new path that we're going to implement, those values will remain. And what we need is just an innovative and creative ideas, but with those values that are making that this crisis is more meaningful than in any other stage of the history.
Thank you, Daniel.
And I would add to that, I mean, I think there's a demand side and a supply side to this, right? On the demand side, I've never seen parents more interested in learning to teach their kids how to read. And I feel like informal education and education that happens outside of the classroom has often been ostracized until this moment. I think the other side of it is on the supply side. I've only ever heard of funding going towards educational technology and innovation. In a lot of ways, that's sort of been halted in many communities, right? And we're looking at, in sub-Saharan Africa, 89% of homes still do not have access to a computer, 82% don't have access to the internet. And so I think we've had to be creative, like Keya's group and so many groups around the world, to try to think of ways that we would often, and we've had access to the same technology for 50 plus years with the radio, but we found new ways to use it. I think it's really kind of exposed some of the infrastructure that's still missing in education that needs to be critically invested in still.
Thanks, Drew. Well, let me ask you all another question. Let me tell you why I think I wrote that book. I put this book together and invited you to contribute, right? So one reason on the surface is very simple. I have the certainty that this moment is going to define life in this world for decades to come, and certainly all of our lives individually. We are not going to forget this. People who were not alive when this moment happened will ask us years from now, what was it like to live through the 2020 pandemic? What was it like to do your work? What was it like to live? What was it like to shop? And so on. And so in some ways, I just wanted to put this moment in a bottle and preserve it. And just preserve it, because I don't think we're going to forget, but who knows how we're going to remember it. Who knows how we're going to remember it. So that was one thing. I thought it was good to just capture this moment. The second reason is I've long known that people who are doing important things in the world, like all of you are, when you do the things, you actually create knowledge. But you don't always make that knowledge visible for anyone but yourself. It becomes tacit knowledge. And I think it's very important to advance the field of educational change, to make the knowledge that people who are doing things in the world gain when they actually lead visible. And I've done this before, as you know. Some years ago, I invited a number of graduates of the IEP program to write a bunch of essays about what they were doing. Not about the pandemic, thank goodness we were not living in a pandemic then, but just about the challenges they were facing. And I've done the same thing with ministers of education and former ministers. In fact, at the same time I was putting this book together, I invited a number of ministers of education in Latin America to do the same thing that I invited you to do, to reflect on how these, in fact, I asked them exactly the same questions that I asked you. I said, how is this pandemic challenging your leadership? How are you facing, what do you think does the future look like? So one reason was to make what you know visible. The second reason was to help all of us crystallize what we think. I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I don't know what I think about an issue until I write it down. I think I know, but it's when I write it down that when I commit my thoughts to paper, that I finally form a position on an issue. And then, especially if you make those thoughts public, then those thoughts have a different level of gravity than the thoughts that only I have access to in my own mind. So I wanted everyone contributing to that to crystallize their thoughts, to mark the gravity of the moment, capturing those thoughts, forcing ourselves to put in writing, what does this moment mean? And the third reason was to just make visible for you, but especially for others who will read these, that no one is really alone, that you are a community, that some of the challenges that you're facing, some of the things you're doing, others are doing as well. And when you kind of think of what we each are doing as a dot in a collage, and you step back and you look at all the dots, you realize the power of all those dots, right? It's the power of the collective. So those were some of my intents in putting this thing together. So let me turn it over to you. What did it do for you to actually have to write your thoughts, to commit to paper, knowing that these were not going to be public, some of what you were thinking about this moment?
If I can start. So yeah. It was actually empowering and a bit of a relief, in a sense of, all the stuff that we'd been processing over the last 6 months. By suggesting that we write this essay, Fernando, you gave me the opportunity to really sort of put it into a reflective framework. There was, we were so busy during COVID because we took it upon ourselves to just do a lot of whatever we could do to support the community. So we were constantly running homeschooling support programs, and it's kind of out of our normal thing what we do because we're a bit more macro level, but we realized that not only did the macro level need help and support, so we were helping governments figure out policies around online learning and, teacher capacity development and all of the big picture stuff, but we realized that if we didn't think about things at this level, then what was being done at this level would almost be irrelevant. So we were just so busy, like constantly busy for the first, I would say, 3 months of the pandemic, and just trying to find ways to support at the grassroots and at the macro level. So when you said write the essay, it just gave me a moment to sort of sit back and reflect on everything that I have learned through the pandemic in terms of what I love about the world of education and what we can do, where I see the limitations are in terms of constraints that have either been imposed upon us or that I have imposed upon them because of my own perspective on education and what education should be or could be. And then how that's going to translate into the future tomorrow, into our new normal, where technology should not replace the human element, but can be a tool for us. And so, in a way where we're reshifting the way that we've been going, where we were saying technology was the panacea, and the pandemic allowed us to see that technology is not the panacea. Even with the best technology, you still need the human touch. So I think the pandemic for me, and then writing the essay, was both like a call to action. The pandemic was definitely a call to action, like so much chance to do something, to have intervention. The essay was, okay, let's sit back, think about the stuff that we did that, we can learn from, how it's useful to people in the future, and how this is going to govern really the agility and the shift that we want for education as we go forward. And your essay allowed that reflection, because honestly, I wasn't taking the time. Like, it was just go, 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 go. So writing something the way that you suggested gives that moment of reflection, gives time to process. And that was really powerful. And I just wanted to add one thing, like the whole issue of tacit and explicit knowledge. It's something that even the international organizations are beginning to see the inherent value in, right? So we're doing right now some work with UNICEF, wherein they're saying what's all the tacit and the explicit knowledge that's out there around issues of education globally. And therefore, how can we, collect that and make sure that it's available for future learning so that it's not forgotten, because it's very easy to forget the tacit, right? The explicit will get recorded, but the tacit, to make it explicit, is a critical thing that we often forget to do once we're past the moment. So your essay is also an exercise in that, right? Taking the tacit, making it explicit, becoming recorded history for futures, for us to share and learn from each other right now, but also for it not to be forgotten in the future, and for learning to happen. So I do thank you for that, because until you suggested that, there was just go, but not sitting back and thinking about the future opportunities and where this would take us.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Thanks for sharing those reflections with us, Fernando. In my case, I said to myself that when you open a book, you open a new world. And for me, this is a new world in terms of how my colleagues are leading, how my colleagues are developing strategies, actions, and are trying to live in these complex times. I think the book is packed with not only knowledge, but also with life lessons. I mean, I read with so much concentration what, for example, some other colleagues like Andrea or Suri have developed about their projects, about fear, about love, and in some way how they began to develop some helpful advice to the readers. And in some way, I found this book very humanistic and very natural to the things that we are facing currently. And I would like to all the audience and to the readers give 3 reasons why I think they should consider reading this book. The first one is that I believe that they expose yourself to new things, because you are open to new practices, best practices, you are open to new experiences, and I think that there are new information, new ideas to solve a problem, and that is very useful. And the second one is, I think that the book gives me a clear understanding of how can I improve myself. And reading helps you to understand the world more, and considering the context and the situations of every of the leaders that stated their reflections in the chapters. And the third one is, I think that it improves your analysis about the difficult situation that we're facing, but also the great opportunity that we need to take responsibility. When you read the book, you have a lot of things to think, a lot of things that you can reflect, and that they will take you in a process, in an inherent process of reflection. And I think it gives you like a unique moment of pause for understanding what comes next and how to deal with that.
Thank you, Daniel. Go ahead, Vinh.
Yeah, so I just think that, I mean, during the pandemic, we all have to make the decision on the spot. It's like, I mean, it is never happened before for anyone. So all of the decision, all of the moves that we made, it will be based on what we think is the best to do at the moment. So when we have a chance to look back, to write the reflection and to read, I mean, from other reflection, so we can, I mean, kind of understand what is the inner, I mean, thinking, why you make that decision. What do you think, whether it works? When you look back, whether you think, I mean, if you have another chance, whether we do the same thing or we do, I mean, in another way. So I think it's really, really important for us as an education, because, you know, I mean, for education, we a little bit want to be on the safe side, right? So all of the decisions that we have made during the pandemic, we don't know whether it's the best that we can do for our kids. But so it is very important after the pandemic, looking at back, make, I mean, the assessment to see whether we are doing the right thing. Yeah, and the reflection really helped me to do that.
Thank you very much, Vinh. let me ask you all a question, and we're coming to the end of our seminar. I'll ask you a question, and then I'll invite you all to make some final remarks and maybe ask each other questions if you have any. But let me ask you a question. We're doing this seminar in the context of Harvard Worldwide Week. As you know well, Harvard didn't always have a Worldwide Week. In the glorious history of this institution, for most of that history, we have been a very decentralized place. And a number of our presidents in years past have been working very hard to try to make the sum, the whole, more than the sum of the parts, to try to promote synergies and to make sure that one hand knows what the other hand is doing. A difficult thing to do, as you know. I mean, I've been associated with this university for more than 3 decades, and I still discover things that happen in this place that I had no idea were happening. And so Harvard Worldwide Week is one of those efforts. It was started under the presidency of President Drew Faust as an opportunity to bring Harvard together and to celebrate the many different ways in which this institution is global. So this year, under the leadership of Vice Provost Mark Elliott, Harvard Worldwide Week is online, which means that it could be more inclusive than ever, because even though there were people who came from abroad, graduates, to participate in Harvard Global Week, it was a very tiny percentage of our graduates. And all of a sudden now, anyone with an internet connection, which most Harvard graduates have around the world, can actually participate in some of it. And so it's a demonstration, I guess. It's an example of a silver lining of the power that the combination of a very large community of graduates and of the internet can produce, at least in giving people a chance to come together and to think together. So in that context of this tremendous power that this institution has, I guess that begs the question of what is our responsibility in a moment like this one that is so serious for humanity. There are 28,000 universities around the world, and maybe they all have responsibilities, but we have our own responsibility given the many gifts that have been given to us. In your mind, what would be good ways to exercise that responsibility in this moment of crisis as people who are Harvard Global, as people who represent some of the best that this university has to offer to the world? Reflecting back on our responsibility, what do you think that is?
I mean, one of the things that I love about Harvard and I loved about my time there is that you bring together all kinds of different people and so many different disciplines from all around the world. And that's what I loved about the IAP program. And I found in each place that I've worked, you can find a Harvard club. You can find people that are collaborating and working. And often it's the case that it's just interesting to meet people doing interesting or different work. But I think now is the time in which we have to engage the larger global Harvard family to come together to solve these problems. And I think we see it in the Harvard Gazette with breakthroughs in science and public health research that are happening. But I think we also need to see that in the education space and in the spaces that connect those. And so I think as Harvard becomes decentralized, the question does become how we can become more connected and be that star of, or that kind of that sky of lights that I think that you were illustrating, Fernando. And so, I would even ask if Harvard, I think we all want to be more connected, all of the alumni around the world that are working on this. But I also think I would love to see the classroom become more connected to solving real problems, because it's simply just better, it's better learning. And you're not going to be able to replicate much of this in a case study soon. And so I think finding a way to bridge the divide between those are not only incredible service learning opportunities, but just greater depth of learning opportunities for students at the university right now, and hopefully for a positive outcome or a better outcome, building back better than what things were before.
Thank you, Drew.
I'll just add to that. So as Fernando knows, I've been an advocate for many years for the greater international outreach from Harvard. I've been quite involved in alumni communities wherever I've lived in the US, in Canada, here in the UAE, and then even when I was working or living in Pakistan and in East Africa. So to me, that the Harvard Worldwide Initiative, I think is so empowering, and especially now this year, because, in the past with Harvard Worldwide, it was there, but those of us who lived in the world outside of Cambridge, it was harder for us to access the programming and the information and so forth. With it being online this year, you know, literally we can all access and be part of it, like we all are here tonight, and we're all in different places. So I think that what's exciting for me about Harvard, not just in being a bit more inclusive, but also then, you know, engaging us in Harvard worldwide opportunities, is that we can bring the international voices back to Harvard in a real sense. We can hopefully contribute to Harvard in terms of expanding its international scope and conversations. And the one thing to remember, Fernando, and I know you know this, but you know, whatever many thousands of universities there are in the world, Harvard is Harvard. It will still remain the pinnacle. It will be who everybody else looks to always to set an example, whether it's in, you know, community connections, whether it's in the research and, you know, the information that we're sharing and learning, whether it's in these personal connections, as well as in its role modeling and giving back to respective communities. The opportunity that Harvard has is because alumni and faculty are global, we can give back globally. And I think that Harvard Worldwide provides that truly amazing platform to make that happen. So I'm wonderfully excited by the move over to this new innovative and more interactive approach.
But agreeing with what you just said, Sajida, it's also a very humbling thought, because you can well imagine how, when the full impact of this crisis is understood, and we haven't yet seen it, right? 50 years from now, people trying to understand this moment will ask really any one of us, but particularly institutions with our resources. So you were in the middle of this pivotal time for humanity. What did you do with your privilege? How did you choose to be helpful? Did you rise to the occasion? And so that's a really humbling thought. I mean, it's very clear that this crisis has made very good leadership visible, emerge, but it will also make visible deficient leadership. And some of that will be visible in the moment, and some of that will even be more visible with hindsight, right? So anyway, other thoughts. It's a humbling thought, what you just said. Other ideas?
I wanted to pick up on the thread of kind of connecting all of us and being able to communicate more, because I think one thing, it's brilliant that we're all able to do this and able to be here. And I think the IEP conference on Saturday was another incredible opportunity because it was online. I'm wondering if, you know, at the start of this crisis, even now, so many months in, IEP alumni, of course, but I think just Hugsy alumni in general, there's so many of us working in education in so many different cities, countries. Is there a way that we can gather information and share resources in real time and help each other? Because I think it's slightly different. The essays we all wrote for this book are incredible and helped us reflect on what our journey has been over the past 6 months. But I wonder if there's a way that we can gather information and what the work we're doing in real time to share with each other and be able to support and share resources that way.
I think it's a phenomenal idea. You know, it reminds me, some years ago, a former president of the Harvard Alumni Association, Teresita Alvarez, was really passionate about public service, as was President Drew Faust. And she made the year of her tenure as president of HAA a year where she tried to use the HAA as a platform that encouraged public service around the world. And her idea was, you know, I mean, I think the way she put it to me is, if all Harvard graduates one day kind of stump at the same time, the earth will move. You know, it's that many of them. And so you could imagine, you could extend that idea and say, if the HAA took it upon itself to say, we are going to try to be a force to prevent the biggest collapse in educational opportunity around the world, I think it would matter. It would make a difference. I don't think it would go unnoticed. But it's an extremely difficult thing to do. I mean, Sajida is very involved in the HAA, so she knows about the possibilities and about the limitations of making something like this happen. And the same with moving the institution. I see the power. When this pandemic started, I reached out to all of you and I said, let's try to start documenting good things that are happening. And you stepped up immediately, Keya, and you said, absolutely, count on me, let's do case studies. And lo and behold, we had written 30 case studies. But in order for something like that to happen, someone needs to make it happen. And there are some things that go beyond the initiative of the individual graduate or student or faculty member, and they need to become institutional priorities for them to become one of the top 3 to which you actually devote time and attention and resources. So I guess that was the spirit of my question. What do you think is the institutional opportunity and responsibility in the current moment? Well, we're coming to the end. We have 4 more minutes as I ask these questions that I hope won't get anyone into big trouble. Do you have any questions for each other or any final thoughts as we conclude? Well, if not, let me only thank you, certainly for the time and the thoughts and the hope that you have spread today at this meeting, but also for taking the time to write these essays. I know that things take effort when you write them, they don't write themselves. And I think it's very generous of you to have taken the time to commit those ideas on paper, to share them with others. And most importantly, let me thank you for the important work that you're doing at this moment to sustain educational opportunity. It's always important work, but I firmly believe it's never been more important. So keep on doing it. And thank you. Thank you for giving me hope. And thanks to good Peter Shapiro, who behind the curtains is wonderful in making these amazing meetings happen so seamlessly, right? As with leadership, leadership is one of those qualities that is most appreciated when it's absent, right? When good things happen, you kind of take it for granted. And so I'm always lucky that things always go well when Peter is behind the scenes. And I know the same is true for your leadership. You make good things happen and we may not notice it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernando.
Thank you.
Stay well, everybody.
Bye, everybody. And you
Thanks,
too.
Fernando.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Peter.